The most exciting position in the NFL is probably wide receiver. However, it turns out you probably shouldn't pick them in the first round. In today's video, I will go over the success rates of each position drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. And some of the results will probably surprise you, or at least they surprised me. I've always heard that tight ends don't succeed when they're drafted in the first round. And it's just kind of like a saying I've always heard, and I've seen it, whether it's Kyle Pitts or OJ Howard or, a dozen other freak athlete tight ends that just have failed. In my head going into this video, I expected the tight ends to be the least successful first round picks, and they are close. And you may ask yourself, hey, how are you going to decide if they were successful or not? Well, I'm not going to watch all of their tape and grade them. Instead, I have found this article from Paul Hembo of ESPN, in which the 20 drafts between 2000 and 2019, he went through and calculated the number of hits and misses for each position, and he calculated the hit for if the player signed a second contract for the team that drafted him or not. So honestly, the bar is not that high. It saves them face if they can re-sign you to another contract. If they don't, that means they really don't like you. First off, I'm gonna just kind of go over his rankings, and then I will compare it to this year's projected mock draft. So overall, there were 635 total first round draft picks. There were 271 hits and 364 misses for a 43% hit rate overall. There was one position that hit an incredibly high percentage of the time, and that is center. That was 11 hits and 1 miss. Now, this is a little odd, but centers don't really get taken in the first round. So for a center to be taken in the first round, they have to be really, really good. So that's part of it. But also, the skills just translate well. The other two positions above 50% hit rate, or at 50% hit rate, is offensive tackle and guard. So you'll notice the offensive line is 50% or greater. Everything else in the NFL is less than that. There are 4 position groups in the 40s with linebacker, quarterback, edge, and defensive tackle with a hit range in the 40s. And each of these has over 50 total draft picks per position. So the sample size is much larger with multiple per year. So cornerback and running back are both at 38%. And cornerback made a lot of sense to me because it's probably the hardest position in the NFL other than quarterback, because you have to be athletic enough to keep up with an NFL wide receiver when you don't know where they're running. Of course, you don't know their playbook unless, you're stealing their signs, like maybe if you're on the Patriots. But for most of them, you don't know where they're going, and you have to just somehow keep up with them, which sounds incredibly hard at the NFL level. So it kind of makes sense to me that corners might not work out. It does surprise me that running backs are only at 38% though, because you don't draft a lot of running backs in the first round. So you would think for them to get drafted in the first round, they would have to be really good. However, there are 2 reasons why this kind of makes sense. Anyways, one is that this time period covers the 2000s, in which the running back was much higher valued than it is today. So that's one thing. So there were more running backs taken in the first round. The second thing is it's not completely uncommon for a team to draft a running back, run him into the ground, and then let someone else pay a second contract. So there's that. The next 2 positions are safety and tight end at 34 and 33% success rates. And there is, the position that I thought was going to be their tight end. 1/3 of tight ends picked in the first round are re-signed. There are a few reasons why the tight ends don't work out in the NFL, but one thing is that it's just so hard to be a borderline offensive lineman level of blocking with a borderline wide receiver level of catching the ball and running routes. So You really have to be able to do everything to be a good tight end, and especially on the college level, they don't block that much unless they go to Iowa. But this does leave one position that is the most likely to fail, and that is wide receiver. Thinking about it, it makes sense. A lot of the failures are probably in the mid-20s, which is barely a first-round pick, especially in some years' drafts. However, not all of them are. For example, there is the Titans legend, Corey Davis, who was the 5th overall pick, who is an objective failure of a 5th overall pick. So, while you may fall in love with him, while it is the hot pick, it might not work out. Another great example of this is the Eagles. So, Howie Roseman, known as a top 5-ish GM in the league. He's really good at free agency and drafting offensive linemen. But he has had a big weakness with wide receivers especially, and it's a storied history at this point. If you've made it this far into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, but back to the video. So what does this mean for this year's draft? Who will be a bust? Who will be good? Well, I will tell you right here and now who the bust will be. The most recent Daniel Jeremiah mock draft has 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round, so 46% of that means either 2 or 3 of these quarterbacks will work out. So on the other hand, of course, 3 or 4 of them will not work out, unfortunately. And you know, it's not me, this is just stats, but you're gonna hate this next one. There will be 6 wide receivers taken, with 3 in the top 10 and 2 in the top 5. Of course, I'm talking about Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors. It's the top wide receivers taken. Everybody, especially in the fantasy community and everywhere else, absolutely loves them so much. They're like, oh, they can't go wrong. But as I mentioned earlier, Corey Davis failed as the 5th overall pick. I know they're not the same, but they are both probably top 5 picks. So, you know, not that different. But by the odds, only 27% of them will work out. So out of the 6, only 1 or 2 of these wide receivers will work out. So that could mean one of the 2 top 5 pick wide receivers ends up a bust. So, and then what positions are going to actually work out in this year's draft? And it is, there's supposed to be 7 offensive tackles picked in the first round with a 59% success rate. Means that about 4 of them are going to work out. And for the most guaranteed pick of the draft, and 92% approval that he is going to work out, Graham Burden, the center from Duke, has a 92% chance to succeed. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope maybe you learned some about what positions you want your team to draft. Maybe calm a bit of the Marvin Harrison hype, or not. Maybe he turns out to be Jamar Chase and is, of course, another huge success. But just be a little wary. So anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and commenting.